Let me start with a question. What if I told you that Apple, the company behind the iPhones, the MacBook, the Apple Watch, the iMacs, and other products, once stood at the edge of bankruptcy? Not struggling, not slowing down, but seconds away from shutting down completely. There was a time when people laughed at Apple, a time when analysts said, "This company will not survive." The man who saved Apple was the same man Apple once fired. And this is not just a tech story, this is a story of rejection, ego, vision, and redemption. Let's rewind and start afresh. In the late 1970s and the early 1980s, Apple was totally unstoppable. The Macintosh changed personal computing, and Apple was seen as being creative, being different, being very bold. At the center of it all was a young visionary called Steve Jobs. Steve wasn't just building computers, he was building belief. But there was the problem. Steve Jobs was brilliant and extremely difficult to work with. As Apple grew bigger, so did internal conflict. Executives wanted stability, Steve wanted perfection. And eventually, Apple fired Steve Jobs from his own company. Imagine that. The company that you build tells you, "We don't need you anymore." That moment would go ahead to change every single thing. After Steve Jobs left, Apple slowly began to lose its identity. There were too many products, too many confusing models, no clear direction. While Apple was confused, Microsoft was winning. Windows computing became cheaper. Businesses chose practicality over creativity. And by the mid-1990s, Apple was bleeding money. Market share was collapsing and developers were abandoning the platform. At one point, Apple had only weeks of cash left. Industry experts openly predicted that Apple is finished. While Apple was falling apart, Steve Jobs was rebuilding himself. After being fired, he started a new company called Next. Next didn't become a massive commercial success, but it helped Steve to grow. At the same time, he invested in a small animation studio. That studio, Pixar. Pixar would later release Toy Story and completely redefine animation. Steve learned important lessons during this period, and some of which are leadership, focus, patience. Unknowingly, Apple will soon need him more than ever. In 1996, Apple was desperate. Out of options, they made a shocking decision. They bought Next. And with that deal, Steve returned to Apple. At first, he was just an advisor, but very quickly, Steve took control. The first thing he did, he cut almost everything. He simplified Apple's product line to just the consumer desktops, consumer laptops, pro desktops, pro laptops, and that was it. Then, he did something that shocked the world. In 1997, Apple was still dying, so Steve Jobs made a move that felt more like betrayal. He called Apple's biggest rivals Microsoft, and Microsoft invested $150 million in Apple. The audience at Apple's keynotes booed, people were angry, but Steve understood something. Pride does not pay salaries, vision does, and that money kept Apple alive. With focus restored, Apple began to innovate again. First came the iMac, then the iPod, and later he introduced iTunes, iPhones, iPads. Apple didn't just sell devices, it sold experience. Simple, beautiful, human. Steve Jobs rebuilt Apple's culture around one idea: make insanely great products and the world will notice. Apple went from nearly bankruptcy to become the most valuable company on earth. Apple's near-death story teaches us a powerful lesson. Being early doesn't guarantee survival. Ego can go ahead to destroy great companies. Focus beats expansion. Apple didn't win because it was lucky. It won because it returned to its original purpose. So next time you see an Apple logo, Remember this: Apple didn't rise smoothly, it almost died. And sometimes the setback you think ruined your life is the training you need to save your life later. I'll see you on another episode of Tech Stories. Mr. Tech Bro, out.